Hello and welcome to a Project Awesome special episode. This is of course the 0131, the military vehicle, the 6-wheel drive military vehicle that we want to mount the organ on the back of. And it's currently somehow looking more forlorn than it did when we found it in the hedge way back in episode 1 all those years ago. One of our project goals for the summer is to get this thing back up and running. Now it's not just the lack of roof and lack of doors that's stopping that happening, it's the fact that the engine doesn't work. Now before I dig into that, let's have a quick recap on how we got to this point. So cast your minds back, way back to episode 1, to my biggest hit video. And back then, the engine had its original V8 petrol engine. Now that engine, it sounded great, and that's about all I can say for it. It was a horrible engine. So we chanced upon a DAF 45 telecoms truck, which had the legendary Cummins 6-cylinder engine, and after a considerable amount of faffing about, lots of faffing about, got it up and running, which was a huge achievement. That felt like a huge achievement. A massive milestone. And on camera I was filling it up with water from a watering can from the tap and said something like, this is just to test it. Tested it, there were no leaks, I parked it up, left it for a considerable time. Forgot all about the fact that there was just water in the cooling system, no antifreeze. Now this is Somerset, where winters are generally quite mild, but either that winter, or perhaps it was even the winter afterwards, on New Year's Eve, I remember thinking just before midnight, gosh, this is really cold. And it was also cold the previous night. So what that meant was we had a frost, everything froze, but it didn't thaw out the next day. And then that night, everything froze again. So there was a double freezing. And I suddenly thought, Brazil! I dropped everything, I came running out here. It was already too late. It had frozen up. The most schoolboy of schoolboy errors. I thought the radiator was damaged, which it was, and I fixed that and then filled it up, and then it leaked from the water pump on the front of the engine. That, it turned out, had a big crack in it, so that had iced up, and of course ice expands, and that had cracked the cast iron water pump that's on the front of the engine. I replaced that, and then it turned out that one of the core plugs had gone as well. Some of you won't know what core plugs are, which is entirely that's entirely reasonable. I'll show you actually. I'll show you on a spare engine that I've got. This is Kermit's spare engine, and what I want to show you is these circles here. There's 3 of them on this engine. So most of the engine block here is thick, heavy cast iron, but these circles are just very thin bits of steel, and they look a bit like bottle caps if you look at them individually. And these holes are left over from the casting process. So, as unlikely as it sounds, engine blocks are cast from sand moulds. And these holes allow access to the cores inside. But all we need to know for the purposes of this discussion is that these are deliberate weak points in the engine. So if you get ice forming inside the engine, it should push out from these plugs rather than crack a block. Because these plugs are easy to replace, but a crack in the block is generally terminal. So I checked the core plugs, which are on this side of the engine, and sure enough one of those was weeping a little bit. So I was able to replace that, which was a bloody fiddly job because the turbo is right in the way. But I got it done, filled it up with water again, and it was fine. And so I'd gone from crushing despair to ecstatic. I felt like I'd redeemed myself. And that was the case for about 2 weeks, as if I recall correctly. I'd left it running for a bit, just over there, and suddenly the person who was helping me steer it about shouted, "There's something coming out the bottom of the engine." And it was a whole load of grey goo. What it was water getting into the engine oil, and that effectively raised the level of the engine oil until there was way too much inside of there, and it just got ejected out of the engine breather. That then got me thinking, worst case scenario has occurred, and like I said on the Land Rover engine there, you can crack the block. There was no external sign of any crack, which meant that there must be a crack inside between the oil sections inside and the cooling system. So back to the pits of despair. I got it running again just long enough to bring it here, and here it has stayed ever since. And I started looking for a new engine because there is no way of fixing an internal crack. I mean, not that I could think of. I mean, how would you even find it? Then it turns out that the engines, which seemed so common some years ago when we got this one, have become rare all of a sudden. Partly because there's a fad for putting them in Land Rovers for some daft reason. So that was it. Project was on hold then until I could find a new engine, and that took me a long time. I think about 1.5 years actually. And eventually I found this one, and then at almost the same time I just happened across a video from one of those people that puts these engines, these massive 6-cylinder engines, in Land Rovers. And he had the engine in his Land Rover, and he'd been through almost the exact same thing that I had, of forgetting about the fact that there was just water in the cooling system and it froze. But here's the thing, going through his video, watching what he went through to diagnose it and see if there was anything he could do about the engine, there's a second set of core plugs. So with that information, it's possible, and only possible, that this engine isn't terminal, that it might not have a crack in the block, that it might be the second set of core plugs. And the reason I didn't know about them is because they're under a cover, and they're much smaller than the big core plugs, which look a lot like the ones that I showed you on the Land Rover engine. This is what they look like. And this cost me, I don't know, about 12 or 15 pounds. So if it is these, it's a very cheap fix. If it's not these, we're back to plan A, and we're taking the engine out of the horse box and putting it in here. So let's find out which it is, because I don't know yet. I'll show you the core plugs down here. You see in there there's a silver circle. That's the one I replaced. Somewhere in here, under an engine cover, there's the rest of those core plugs, the little diddy ones that I showed you. Alright, so the obvious bits are to get the fuel filter out and the fuel pump, I reckon, as well. Now the question is, can I get to this panel without removing all of this, which I think I can, and I really hope so, because yeah, I don't want to go there. This is the injector pump. This is what doses the fuel into the engine, and it's a very precision bit of kit that's set up in a particular way. So the timing of this relative to the engine is critical. So that's going to stay there if at all possible. That one done. Well, now it's loose, there's nowhere for it to go. God, it couldn't be more awkward, could it? Really couldn't. Well, it's off the engine, but we've got to get it actually out. There it is. Oh, that's what all the fuss was about. As you can see, it's bolted. That bolt there is right at the front of the engine under the injector pump. What a miserable experience that was. Anyway, now we can actually look in the side here and okay, I've stuck a light in there so you should be able to see right in the middle of the picture. There's that circle, and now in the middle, you can see that circle is pushed out. So you see how one core plug, that's where it's supposed to be, in that position, and the one next to it that way is in the correct position. But that one on the end, that's been pushed out by ice. That's the problem. Or that's a problem. Hopefully it's the remaining problem. So that's what I've got in this packet, is some more of those. So if I can poke that one out. Well, that was easy. I was just about to start grumbling that I had to buy 5 of these just to replace one, but if it gets the engine running, then that's an awful lot cheaper than a new engine. Oh, hang on, this is the wrong side. Oh, that's not very good, is it? Oh, bugger. That's really odd and irritating that wrong ones. Of course, I bought these a long time ago before I'd actually got that cover off and had a chance to measure this. So now what I'm going to do is to see if I can just stick this one back in. It's got no apparent damage to it. I'm going to go and find a socket that will fit that and that I can use as a drift, tap it back in. The reason I'm going to chance it with an old one is because I do have the capability of pressure testing the cooling system once it's sealed up again. Anyway, let's try and drift this back into where it should be. So this is the closest fitting socket that I found. Going in like that. Yeah, well, that's that. That's that in. The core plug is in, but is the system now sealed? Let's fill it up and find out. I got this cheapo pressure testing kit from some seller off eBay. It was dead handy for checking Kermit when I was rebuilding that. So that's the adapter for Kermit's expansion tank, which of course is off a Range Rover. So I'm hoping that one of these will fit this. Of course, this is a Russian radiator, so who knows. But most of the Russian stuff's a copy of the American stuff, and I have American style adapters here. They're saying that that's the biggest one, I think, and that's not going to fit. So this is the Russian radiator cap. This is the biggest adapter I've got for the pressure tester, and it's not that near. So what I'm going to try and do is dismantle both of these and make a mashup. There it goes. Okay, so I'm going to go with that. Get the original spring in. So that's all original now, apart from the middle part. Okay, so now we should be able to screw it on there, and then this rubber should now press against that. So we've still got a bit of spring pressure, so that may now be sealed. Let's go and find out. Okay, we're up to 5. Well, the core plug in there is looking great. Unfortunately, the radiator isn't. So we've got a leak in the top of the rad there. 3 times I've fixed this radiator already using JB Weld super heavy duty epoxy. And those repairs have held, but now we've got another hole. I'm starting to wonder how many times I'm going to fix this before I just give up. put a clamp on there. So to try and pinpoint exactly where these holes are, I'm going to try blowing some air in it with a little bit of pressure. So I got a jump pack, a tiny, not a compressor, is it? Little tire inflator, and then a Schrader valve, as you'd find in a tubeless car tyre. I'm just going to hold that on there, and I'm not going to try and hold the pressure, I'm just trying to get some air to blow through the hole so I can find out exactly where they are. There you are, and I've got a magnifying glass. Yeah, it is literally a pinhole. Just there at the tip. That's the hole I've identified so far. But of course, I might have just made that hole by pushing away these fins. So this is a case of fix the hole, test, fix another hole and test, so on. Well, late last night I managed to find two holes, a tiny one there and one there, and I've epoxied those up with JB Weld. So I got a feeling there's another one somewhere around here though. So we'll try pumping it up again, a bit more soapy water, and see if we can find the third pinhole. Which, like I say, I think is up there. Well, there's a definite hole we found. So that's right next to my repair. So you can see on the right hand side, that's the repair I did last night. And in the middle of the picture, there's that hole that we've just uncovered. I'm going to fix that, wait, pressure test, and see if we've actually got there. So you saw I keyed up the surface using the scribe. I'm just giving it a quick clean with some mess and a cotton bud. Good. Got to leave this now for at least 6 hours. In the meantime though, I'm wondering if we could do a similar trick with the spray cans and pressure test just the engine block on its own. So I'm thinking we block up this one, if we can, and then pour water in this one. And we need to attach a valve to it. I'm wondering if one of these adapters that are supposed to go on an expansion tank, not that one, I've got so many of them here, one might be the right size. close. Trim it down just a tad, and that'll go in there, and we can just pump away. That'll be super convenient. We're only after a millimetre. Yeah, so that's going to work. Okay, we're at 10. So we're on 10 psi. Let's go and have a look. Excellent. That's looking very hopeful. So I'm going to leave that now for a fair while, just to be sure. And then we'll move on. Right, I've had a cup of tea and a flapjack. It's been at least half an hour, and we're now down to 9 psi, which I can put down to just the, well, whatever. I'm not going to worry about losing 1 psi. Let's have a look at the core plug. Perfect. Excellent. Not only does that mean that the core plug is alright, it means there's no cracks in the block. So all round, that's fantastic news. I mean, there's still the radiator to sort out, but the engine itself is looking increasingly likely that it might be saveable. Oil filter for when the time comes, and a nice new gasket. Both genuine, which is nice. They weren't advertised as genuine parts, so that's a bit of a treat. This gasket is for this cover because this holds back a load of oil. There should be oil flowing where those push rods are, and this gasket really needed changing anyway. Old one has had it. Well, at least the access is a lot better this time without the radiator in the way. I know what we're dealing with now. Got a nice fresh fuel filter to go on. It looks like it's leaking here on this solder joint where the temperature sensor is. I'm starting to get the impression if I keep it on 10 psi for long enough, we'll find leaks all over the shop. It's just not a very well made radiator. This is like in common with an awful lot of Soviet stuff I've found, that the design is excellent. The execution of the design, the construction is variable. Very variable. I think the big issue, I mean, you got to remember this was made in the mid-70s in the Soviet Union. And I think of it as Soviet rather than Russian, because the Soviet Union was a very different place to Russia before or Russia since. In 1970s USSR, it's, from what I understand, from what I've read, it's very hard to lose a job through incompetence. There was full employment, but that meant that lots of things, you couldn't get fired for being rubbish at your job. so hence quality control is a bit iffy. Very iffy. Look at the Soviet space program. Yeah, so we've got a constant drip from here now, so that's why we're losing pressure. I'm going to say it's good enough. I'm not happy with it, but it's good enough. It's certainly good enough to get the engine up and running. And we can worry about this at some future date. Because I've got to put this back together now, the radiator cap. That middle bit, that was what was riveted before. So I'm going to use a coach screw and an O-ring to seal the bottom. There we go. Should be able to roll with that. That should be watertight. We've got rubber seal there and the O-ring there. That should work. Stuck the fans back on, and so we're ready to, yes we are, we're ready to install it. Antifreeze. I know it's the middle of summer, but it was last time I filled this up, and we all know how to make. I'm not going to pressure test it again because one, I've just rebuilt the radiator cap, and two, having already tested the engine and the radiator separately, the only place it can leak now is where these hoses join the radiator, and that's easy to keep an eye on. Next job then is to empty what's in the sump, so it's going to be a horrible mix of oil and water, and then I'm going to flush the engine as best I can, fit a nice new filter, put some fresh oil in there, then we can start it up. Well, try and start it up. Yeah, it's not every day you see engine oil looking like that. Whilst that's draining, we can go and get the batteries from the horse box. That's just about done. Look at that, horrible. Brand new genuine filter, and it's going to be on there for about 10 minutes. Sump plug. Okay, we're ready to fill up with oil. Now, because the idea is that I put this oil in, start it up, run it for 10-15 minutes and then drain it away, I was just going to get the cheapest oil that I could find and then get the correct specification oil next time around. But it turns out the cheapest stuff is also the correct specification, so that's good. So I've got 2 tubs of 15W40. I'm going to decant it into a 5 litre container, and I'll put 15 litres in there, hook up these batteries, and then we'll see what happens. Right then, we've got oil, we've got water, we've got fresh batteries. I'm going to try and fire it up. Now if this works, it'll fire up and then probably immediately die, because don't forget we've put a break in the diesel fuel system. When I change the diesel filter, there's going to be a load of air in there. It might bleed itself, it might need bleeding, I can't remember on this engine. Oh yeah, first challenge is to make it turn over. Alright, so we're in neutral. And no red light. Now we have a red light. Let's go. Excellent. It was a bit hesitant at first, like I said it would be, but it sorted itself out. That sounds great. It's so good to hear it running again after all this time. Turbo spinning as well when I rev it, which is another really good sign. That's also very reassuring. That'll do. Ended. Oh, feels good to hear that run again. And it sounded great, it really did. What a result! I truly thought I'd ruined that engine. And now it's back. I'll put a link to the video where I discovered about that internal core plug. It's a chap who put one of these engines in a Land Rover. Pff, crazy. But without seeing that video, we'd have just gone ahead and replaced this engine with the one that was in the horse box. So what a saving in time and effort, apart from anything else. So next up, we'll have to see if it moves. And I'll show you what's under this tarp. It's horrible. But I'll show you the full horror of that and tell you what I'm going to do about it. So join me for that. Cheers for now. Another brand new oil filter. Take this one off, it's been on there for 15 minutes. Should you have a quick encore?